What's up guys, also Football Talk here. This kicks off a final week of divisional draft breakdowns as we'll talk about the NFC and the AFC West. We've done all the other divisions and I hope that you've followed along so far or will consider listening to the other videos. If this is your first one of these, what I do here is go through every single pick for all 32 teams, give a quick scouting report and a projection for the pro team, look at each class as a whole and then compare them to each other inside the division in the context of how they use the resources, what plan they followed, and how this piece coincides with the other roster moves that they've already made after studying those. For the first team here, we'll take a veteran trade into account since the draft pick was used directly on a player during the draft process, but if there were any other moves beforehand that affected available resources and where each team picked, I'll simply mention them on the side for context. Once again, make sure to head over to my page hellosofootballtalk.com for detailed draft breakdowns and other related content before we get into training camp battles and stuff to prepare us for the upcoming NFL season. The link to that and my social media outlets can be found in the video description, and timestamps for each individual team and the divisional draft rankings are down below as well. But for now, let's talk about the NFC West, in particular starting with the Arizona Cardinals, who actually didn't start the draft by making a selection, but rather using their first round pick on a veteran receiver when they acquired Marquise Brown from the Baltimore Ravens in exchange for pick 23. The selections that they did actually make: second round 55th overall Trey McBride, tight end Colorado State, 2 third rounders 87th overall Cameron Thomas, edge defender San Diego State, and 100th overall Mike Sanders, edge defender out of Cincinnati, then 2 6th rounders Keontae Ingram, running back USC, and Lester Smith, offensive lineman out of Virginia Tech, and then 3 more picks in the 7th round: Christian Matthew, cornerback Valdosta State, Jesse Luketa, edge defender / linebacker out of Penn State, and Marquise Hayes, the interior offensive lineman out of Oklahoma. And let's quickly talk about the trade for Brown here in exchange for pick 23, which kind of came out of nowhere for most people, but Brown himself apparently already was at the Arizona Cardinals draft party, and there was some frustration with his usage in the Baltimore offense. Arizona did get back pick 100 and ended up selecting a player that I liked a lot with that selection, but still, to get a wide receiver for slightly better draft value than where he was originally taken, and at best lived up to that status, and now you acquire him a year before you probably have to pay him after letting Christian Kirk go this offseason, that's not really smart business to me. Whether it's a move to appease Kyler Murray or as a preliminary addition with the DeAndre Hopkins suspension looming, I believe reconnecting with Kyler as the deep threat for that offense could be fun to watch, but I don't like the process behind it necessarily. The first guy that did actually pick here, Trey McBride, who was the focal point of the Colorado State offense last season, catching 90 passes for over 1,100 yards as a first-team All-American, was my number 1 tight end and the top of most people's boards. Already ran a pretty diverse route tree at Colorado State, athletic mover who can sink his hips well and has an advanced understanding for timing up route patterns. In the run game, he really latches his hands into the chest of defenders and controls blocks with the squatty build to transfer power from the ground up. Not overly explosive to just stick his foot in the ground and run away from defenders, with a lot of his production coming on underneath stuff. Only has a 78-inch wingspan, which gives him a below average catch radius and leads to some issues as a blocker sometimes, particularly against those longer defenders. It's kind of weird how the Cardinals under Cliff Kingsbury have never really valued or utilized the tight end position traditionally until Zach Ertz showed up last season in the middle of the year when they traded for him, and now all of a sudden their first selection is at that spot, where they did bring back Ertz as well, so it kind of feels like they're just going with the flow almost and look what fits. Certainly a bit of questionable how they all of a sudden want to transition the offense, and if they understand how to use him, I don't mind it at all. Then the third round of Cam Thomas, dense muscular frame that carries 265 to 270 pounds well, can probably trim down to play outside linebacker or line up between the tackles, was in a penetrating role on the interior for San Diego State by shooting up fields and being quick with his hands to shed blockers, particularly with the high swim. He shows an impressive first step and twitchiness for that size, and last season he amassed 77 total pressures on just over 500 pass rush snaps. He didn't play much of a refined role at San Diego State without a distinguished approach as a pass rusher, and once blockers are able to get their hands inside his chest, he really has a tough time getting off them, doesn't show much of an ability to anchor against angular blocks, and relies on blindly shooting upfield at times. Thomas finally is kind of a similar player to J.J. Watt in terms of a big, long defensive end who can reduce and play inside a whole lot, and win with the arm over in the run and pass game. Not saying that he's anywhere close to the type of player JJ was in his prime, but just in terms of the way that he can win, somewhat similar in that regard. So probably going to be a rotational piece, more some passing downs early on, as they try to teach him to control the point of attack in the run game and kind of keep working on diversifying his pass rush portfolio. Leading us to Myjai Sanders, who is the player that I mentioned that they selected with the pick that they acquired along with Marquise Brown from Baltimore in that trade. Long and athletic kid at 6'5", 245 pounds, can surprise blockers in the run game with the way that he shoots his hands inside the chest and rocks the pads backwards at times, with the sudden hands and agility to jump inside of blocks. With his get-off and long strides up the arc to consistently threaten offensive tackles in their sets, and then can win with that two-handed swipe or also packing a nasty up and under move. That lack of build does show up at instances where blockers are able to clamp down on him and make his rush stall that way, and while I love his activity in that regard, you have to question with the way that he would be used to freelance at times if he can actually fulfill more typical run fits. Arizona gets another freaky athlete here who can basically line up at any spot in the front seven and will probably do so on passing downs at least. I wouldn't be surprised at all if he plays around 70% of the snaps as a rookie, to be honest, which is kind of crazy just because he allows them to do so many different things. If they don't have a particular role for him and don't really figure it out, that I could also see him kind of being a rotational specialist early on, but I think he has the skill sets to develop into a quality starter for a long time. Leading us to the 6th round, because they didn't have a pick in the 4th or 5th, with Keontae Ingram, running back who lost his starting gig at Texas to a guy who'll be a first rounder next year in Bijan Robinson, and then he transferred to USC where he touched the ball 178 times for well over 1,000 yards and 5 touchdowns. Has that burst-oriented running style where he can hesitate as he works through traffic and then hit a crease as it opens up. He displays impressive vision and shorter area quicks, I thought, with natural hands and the firm base at 220 pounds to neutralize blitzes and pass pro. If defenders are able to wrap him up at or behind the line of scrimmage, too often he gets hung up and stopped there as the rest of the defense converges on him, and while I like his positioning and striking ability in protection, his hands can kind of slide up at times and make it tough for him to control blocks. The Cardinals did bring back James Conner on a 3-year, $21 million deal, but after 2 years they can basically cut him for nothing. I loved the 7th round pick Eno Benjamin last year, and I think we'll see more of him this season, but Ingram is a very talented all-around back and could be there long term, maybe along with Eno, as this duo if they decide to move on from Conner. Then with Lessiter Smith, who was my number 13 overall interior offensive lineman and is an ass-kicker guard, who I would have had no problem with late on day 2, 6'3", 315 pounds, with great thickness in his midsection, thighs and butt, brings heavy hands and a tone-setting attitude in the run game, has the force in his upper body and hip flexion to dig defenders out of the gap, and then in pass pro he can control defenders as he strikes with his hands and deadens the rush almost. Looking at his measurables at the combine, however, including the physical dimensions, the only thing above the 44th percentile was his 40-yard dash, which was still at a modest 5.18, only his 32-inch arms, which hurts his ability to secure blocks, and he routinely misjudges the movement of second-level defenders. I really believe that that's the biggest area of improvement that he has. Probably going to sit behind Justin Pugh and Will Hernandez early on, but what have either one of those guys really shown since the early days with the Giants respectively? So I think Smith has the chance to enter the lineup eventually as a rookie. Next up would be Christian Matthew, but I couldn't and honestly didn't try to get my hands on any Valdosta State tape. But just looking at the athletic profile, 6'2", nearly 200 pounds, 80.5-inch wingspan, 4'5" speed, and a 41.5-inch vert. The athleticism is certainly there, and they need some guys to work without a corner, but unfortunately I don't have an educated opinion on him. The two other guys in the 7th I can speak on. First of all, Lucetta. This past year, his coaches asked him to play on the edge because they needed some help there, and the one thing that you saw right away is that he helps to stop the run with super active hands at the point of attack. You will see the ability to win with speed and a downward swipe, but can also build up force to go through the chest of blockers, and has some suddenness to counter inside. But nobody has really taught Lucetta yet to eliminate that significant step backwards that he has. He doesn't really attack the edges of the blocker's frame nearly enough at this point, and a lot of times he'll end up just pushing the tackle backwards without making much of an impact. Somebody who can play standing up or walking down and rush on the edge on passing downs. So I can see him have a certain role, even though he may not be able to get on the field until he has proven himself on special teams. And finally with Marquise Hayes, a guy who has 36 career starts at left guard, a dude who will add a lot of grit to your offense with the way that he works upwards in contact, gets tight to the chest and continues to move them through the whistle in the run game. Super quick with relatching his hands when Russia knocked them off momentarily, and his hand usage overall is highly advanced for college, while showing great awareness for twists. He doesn't possess the lateral agility to actually reach block defenders on the play side, and in pass pro, he loses bend in his knees throughout plays, while also not mirroring sideways particularly well, I would say. And he's prone to grab cloth, which got him penalized 9 times in 2021. He did go a lot later than I expected, and I think he has the mental makeup and gritty playstyle to start in this league, or at least be a quality backup for a long time, so I thought this was a nice pick as well. Obviously, that connection reformed between Kyler Murray and Hollywood Brown will define what this draft looks like for them, since it's basically the first round pick who they have to pay earlier than usual. I think it wasn't the smartest move, but he should be able to put up some big numbers for them and open up the offense. And the other interesting thing is still the high capital used on the time position all of a sudden. Obviously, McBride is my number one at the position, but not the team that I would have linked him to just because they've rarely used the time position until Ertz got there late. And other than that, Steve Keim's company just love those hybrid or position flexible types of defensive players. When you look at Cam Thomas, Micah Sanders, and even Jesse Luketa in the 7th, there's stuff to like about all of them, but now it's time to actually figure out where to put all those pieces. Left those 2 day 3 offensive linemen that they selected, which I wouldn't be shocked if either one of them starts week 1, but at worst the added quality depth there, and could end up being cheap replacements down the line. No corners until the 7th round was very surprising to me, and the track record up high in the draft hasn't been great for Arizona, so I'm a bit worried here, but not a bad draft by any means, which leads us to the reigning Super Bowl champions in the Los Angeles Rams, who did make a pick within the top 100, thanks to general manager Les Snead's F10 picks motto, having acquired quarterback Matt Stafford and edge defender Von Miller last year to help them win a championship. The picks that they did make: 3rd round, 103rd overall, Logan Bruss, interior offensive lineman, Wisconsin; 4th round, 142nd overall, Jacoby Durant, cornerback, South Carolina State; 5th round, 164th overall, Kyron Williams, running back, Notre Dame; 2 6th rounders, Quentin Lake, safety out of UCLA, and Darren Kendrick, cornerback out of Georgia; and then 3 more picks in the 7th round: Daniel Hardy, edge defender / linebacker out of Montana State; Russ Yeast, safety, Kansas State; and AJ Curry, offensive tackle, Michigan State. Let's start with Bruss, who from 2019 on has started all 28 games that he was available for Wisconsin, covers plenty of ground, lateral in the zone run game, and accelerates his feet through contact. He's a balanced pass protector who operates from a wide base, doesn't overact the defensive movement, along with excellent grip strength to control rushes, which is why he hasn't given up a sack since 2019. Generally plays with his weight out in front on too many occasions, which leads to some balance issues at times. Lacked the lateral agility to really deal with inside counters out of tackle, which he was playing the last couple of years, and ends up lunging because of it, while having dealt with several minor injuries throughout his career. The Rams lost their starting right guard in Austin Corbett, so Bruss probably is the direct replacement for him, with the ability to kick out to right tackle in a pinch if Rob Havenstein were to get banged up. It's kind of a similar player profile, I would say, in terms of somebody who may not be super quick in terms of his footwork out of tackle, but has the size and a really controlled game overall to be the type of player, which is kind of funny because Havenstein himself, formerly of Wisconsin, which is us to day 3 already with Jacoby Durant, has very patient feet off the line to match man coverage, while trusting his 4.38 speed and reading the hips of receivers particularly well, oftentimes negated wideouts for full games. He actually even shadowed Clemson's wide receiver Justin Ross in a matchup last season and did pretty well. He's like a missile racing up against toss and screen plays his way, and he's an extremely reliable tackler, missing just 3 of 31 attempts last season, but he is only 5'9.5", about 180 pounds, with all of his size measurements in the 26th percentile or worse. It shows up when playing against bigger receivers, where they are able to create some separation with push-offs at the top of the route, and his awareness in zone is still a bit of a work in progress, I would say. Ellie did bring back Troy Hill a year later in a trade back with the Browns to play in the slot. You're looking at a couple of smaller guys at that number 2 cornerback spot, which is fine for that off-zone role, more so across from Jalen Ramsey, but I think Durant has the talent and demeanor to stand out and earn the gig for them. Which brings us to Kyron Williams, a former 4-star wide receiver recruit, an excellent zone runner who can dip and widen off that inside foot to work frontside or hit the cutback when a seam opens up, and he can punish poor backside discipline, gets really low in his cuts, and can actually completely stop and start, has the quick twitch to separate as a route runner, and consistently catches the ball with his fingertips, and he's one of the best all-around pass protecting backs in terms of IDing pressure, positioning himself, and striking upwards to control rushes. However, once again, just like Durant, only 5'9", just under 200 pounds, with only 4.65 speed, so he lacks great size or explosiveness, which is a bad combination in the NFL. You barely see him actually break tackles, in part because he's easier to wrap around, and you can argue the description jack of all trades, master of none kind of applies with him here. He was, however, my number 7 overall running back, and I think he should have gone in the 3rd round. I expected him to go lower, measuring in at sub 200 pounds and having very underwhelming testing, but one of the best all-round backs I thought, who can contribute right away in 3rd downs for LA. Then with Quentin Lake, a top 15 safety for me, thanks to the feel for position, being able to read body language and anticipate route patterns, shows good urgency to run the alley and isn't afraid to shoot through the C-gap when it opens up in front of him in the run game. Just very clean tape overall I thought watching him, but he did run a 4.59 in the 40 at the combine. Don't believe he has the free safety range or the quick twitch ability to match the sudden types of slot receivers consistently, and his missed tackle rate went up by nearly 5% last season. He is a great fit here, however, for a split safety oriented defense where he can read and drive in routes from depth, most likely as a backup, but will be ready to play when he's called upon. Darian Kendrick presents a lanky build with arms going below his knees when he's in his stance at 6 feet, 190 pounds. His eyes are locked in on the hips of receivers in man and anticipates the breakpoint well, doing a good job of mid-pointing targets in zone. And finally, his wide receiver background shows up with the way that he attacks the football in the air, but he was run by a couple of times, but it was impressive for Ohio State receivers back in the 2021 Sugar Bowl, which is when I first got a little bit concerned about him. His pro day numbers went at bottom 10 percentile across the board, including an abominable 4.75 in the 40, and he's not super interested to get involved in run support either, just continuing to add to the corner room with a bit of a different skill set to the guys that they already have there, and can make an impact if not asked to carry routes vertically as much, as more of a press zone type of guy. A guy that I am very excited about here though, Daniel Hardy, had a monster 2021 season when he finished 2nd in the FCS with 24.5 tackles for loss and tied for 2nd nationally with 16.5 sacks. Not somebody who you can leave unblocked on the backside of run calls, because he'll run down guys from behind and also plays with good vision through blocks closer to the action. If offensive tackles don't get enough depth against him, Hardy can beat them around the corner in a hurry with that 4.64 speed. He shows impressive flexibility to twist and turn his way around tackles and can take advantage of blockers getting their way too far shifted outside, but burning a hand in there and opening up a direct path to the quarterback. He did only have 1 season as a starter on defense for an FCS program, so that's a bit head scratching, so to speak. Features a narrow lower half and ends up on the turf a lot more than you'd like to see, and his rushes are largely based on field rather than setting up and stringing together moves throughout games. One of my favorite sleepers on the edge, I would say, and finds himself in a great position where he has Leonard Floyd in front of him along with either Terrell Lewis or Justin Hollins, probably starting at that second outside linebacker spot, to not be thrown in the fire, but could have a major role a year from now thanks to the natural talent that he displays. Yeast I didn't have time to watch specifically, but a couple of the notes that I took: willing to contribute in run support, quick reactionary skills in zone coverage, flies on the field covering kicks, and has the skills to compete for snaps in the slot, even though he's certainly undersized and didn't really produce until his redshirt senior campaign, so probably gonna have to earn future playing time on defense with his work on special teams. And then finally Curry, 6'7", 310 pounds, but not a great athlete, and arm length that is not really up to par at his height, but does excel with body positioning and angles in the run game, frames his rush as well, and kinda knows how to maximize his length with those aiming points. So as a swing tackle and 7th guy to carry on game days, maybe, that's not bad this late. While the Rams have been the poster child for value improving commodities over draft picks and been happy to part ways with those assets under the current regime, they've also been one of the best teams at filling out the rosters with role players and developing guys from the middle and late rounds, and I believe they once again got guys who will make an impact for them eventually. Russ should immediately step in as their starting right guard. I could see Durant become the starting field side corner. Kyron is going to be an excellent addition as this all-around back. Lake may not start at safety, but he's a great fit for that defense and an insurance policy, and I love Hardy as this developmental passer specialist. Plus then they added somewhat depth pieces late, who will need to impress coaches and teams. I like this a lot better than what they did last year, and I see a clear path for almost all of the players that they have. Just limited resources coming in, but could yield some valuable pieces down the road. Leading us to the San Francisco 49ers, another team without a first round pick, but they ended up making 7 selections between picks 93 and 221, picking up some pretty impressive athletes along the way. Let me quickly run you through them. 2nd round, 61st overall, Drake Jackson, edge defender USC, 2 third rounders, 93rd overall Tyron Davis-Price, running back LSU, and 105th overall Danny Gray, wide receiver SMU. 4th round, 134th overall Spencer Burford, the offensive tackle / interior offensive lineman out of UTSA. 5th round, 172nd overall Samuel Womack, cornerback out of Toledo. 3 6th rounders, Nick Sakelj, offensive tackle Fordham, Kalia Davis, interior defensive lineman at UCF, and Tariq Castro-Fields, cornerback Penn State. And then finally 7th round, 262nd overall, and Mr. Irrelevant, Brock Purdy, quarterback Iowa State. The first name up here, Drake Jackson, a guy that creates a lot of issues in the run game with his heavy hands to set the edge and the short area quickness to back up blockers, while also featuring tremendous chase down speed from the backside. Probably has the best bend of any pass rusher in this class, being able to dip and rip his way to the quarterback, but also has some serious shake to him to win inside or out. Last year, he quietly put up 26 total pressures on 182 pass rush snaps, so not bad by any means. After he was perceived to be a first round pick coming into the year, at this point he's not a very disciplined run defender, whether it's jumping inside of guys on the edge or letting the quarterback get around when pulling the ball. He has to do a better job of using the length and keeping his frame clean in the pass game, and doesn't feature much of a power element in that regard yet. The 49ers did lose Arden Key, and it feels like Dee Ford isn't really part of this roster anymore. So as one of the more talented edge rushers in this class, I could see Jackson finishing the top 3 on that team among sacks, as one of the best groups who just throw waves at the opposing team. Which brings us to Davis-Price, the running back out of LSU, a very downhill-oriented runner who constantly plows through defenders once he's built up momentum, can change up his pace, and has that bursty running style with acceleration through his plants while wrapping up the ball tightly in traffic. Shows some suddenness to work his way up open option routes, and patiently slides in front of rushers in pass pro, but not a very creative open field runner who rarely actually makes defenders straight up miss, gets caught from behind by safeties on several occasions, and lacks that big play ability, while fighting the ball a bit, trying to catch it, and only hauling in 28 passes for 185 yards for his entire career. Kind of interesting fit here is more of a north-south runner for a team built on more lateral run schemes and those one-cut slicing types at the running back spot, but I guess Shanahan is drafting a running back in the 3rd round every year now, which isn't a great sign for this guy, since last year's pick, Trey Sermon, barely saw the field for them and was kind of doghouse. But let's move on to Danny Gray. That 4.33 speed that he ran at the combine definitely shows up on tape, has that extra gear when the ball's in the air to detach vertically on go routes, but can also take a slant 70 yards to the house, tracks the ball naturally over either shoulder, and stays focused throughout contact, while showing the want as a blocker at least to get it done. But it does feature more of a slender build, and doesn't yet understand how to avoid contact as a route runner, needing to do a better job of attacking the edges of corners, and has too many balls slip through his hands by having them part which led to dropping 7 of 56 catchable targets this past season. So he's going to be another guy who can run away from the defense if you put the ball in his hands on the move, and adds a bit of a vertical element to this offense, which we should see more heavily featured with Trey Lance, most likely taking over on the center in year 2, but not really a super refined route run or anything like that. Let's move on to day 3. First up with Burford here, has played at left guard and tackle at a high level for one of the top rushing attacks in the country. Explosive out of his stance and raises through blocks to create movement. In pass protection, he displays nice rhythm in his kick slides and keeps his hands ready to strike, and kind of maximizing his nearly 35-inch arms with how he widens the arc of rushers constantly and kind of makes it tough for them to work around him. There is some wasted movement off the ball in the run game for Burford to not overstride, and he gets a little top heavy and kind of leans into defenders at times, which leads to balance issues. Doesn't have a ton of sand in his pants and has his problems against guys who can convert speed to power well. This guy can probably start at every spot in the offensive line other than center. Could easily see him start at guard along with last year's 2nd rounder Aaron Banks, or be a quality number 6 filling in for really any spot. Just offers the versatility to, even if he's a primary backup, if you have an injury, you don't really have to shuffle those guys around. Leading us to Samuel Womack, a former walk-on at Toledo, quick but patient feet to stop his receivers snap off the routes, but not get burned on double moves either, and has the 4.39 speed to carry vertically, judges the catch point exceptionally well, and is sudden to race up to quick completions in front of him. You see him get taken for a ride by more physical blockers typically, and he's not super interested to come off his island anyway. Can be kind of boxed up by bigger receivers on the perimeter, but almost zero slot experience, so it's kind of an issue, not really showing that ability to win against bigger bodies, but also no time spent inside. I think we have to question if his size makes him a nickel only, which will be interesting in correlation with the 2 mid-round picks at corner last year, who are probably in the running for the void left by K'Wan Williams in the slot. Then we get those 3 6th-rounders, first up with Sekelj, very good establishing position in the run game with those first steps, has a chunky low half, and looks like he's pushing the sled on angular blocks with those impactful strides, creating major cutbacks and zone runs. Patient, rhythmic kick slide to cut off the angle for guys around the corner, with a sturdy base to swallow long arms and a strong post leg versus inside counters, but he does tend to dip his head into contact and gets his weight too far out in front in the run game, while only having 32.5-inch arms, and those length and balance issues will be taken advantage of much more routinely at the next level by guys who can incorporate push-pull or power-to-speed maneuvers. Length limitations and just some of the balance issues probably limit his ability to get out there, tackle a whole lot, but he could make some of those back-end roster guys on the offensive line expendable for them. This is a guy who's consistently the first man off the ball and a frequent visitor at the opposite side of the line of scrimmage, has the natural force and slipperiness to knife through the reach of linemen, and can be disruptive in the run game, but also bench press blockers into the backfield. Too often, however, it leads with his head into contact, and there's certainly room for improvement in terms of the awareness for run schemes, as well as just rush with more of a plan and not dance around sideways as much. He's the kind of explosive, upfield type of player that the Niners typically covet, probably competing for snaps at free technique behind Javon Kinlaw and Maurice Hurst, so probably not going to see the field a whole lot early on, particularly coming off a torn ACL mid-season, but there are things to like here. The last one of those 6th-rounders, Castro Fields, has good size at 6 feet, 195 pounds, easy gliding speed to run with guys down the sideline, but also quick to come downhill out of his pedal, and his closing burst in zone is pretty impressive as well. He quickly shifts inside versus the run and shows excellent pursuit overall, but does get happy feet in zone coverage to some degree, trying to jump back and forth between routes, and slips off way too many tackles, just trying to drag guys down, which led to 16 of 49 tackling attempts being missed this past season, so a major area that he needs to clean up. But he was a top 20 corner prospect for me, and there probably has to be something off the field that kind of concerns teams here for him to go this late. But he's a true outside corner, and I would not be surprised if he becomes a key part of the rotation later this year, as long as he cleans up the tackling, like I said. And then finally with Brock Purdy, Mr. Irrelevant, like I said, a true competitor and gamer who has had some of the best showings in the biggest games for Matt Campbell's program. He shows good vision for the field, finds leverage advantages, and delivers the ball with a nice touch. It may not be necessarily how you coach it, but Purdy has impeccable feel for pressure and how to navigate around it, with that subtle elusiveness inside the pocket, and he's also burnt defenses with key first down scrambles way more often than his speed should allow him to. He does have a tendency of releasing off his back foot or just trying to flick his hips through without really transitioning his weight forward. His accuracy past 30 yards is pretty spotty, showing limited arm strength, and then on the run kind of releases the ball off the wrong foot way too often. I think this guy could be Shanahan's new version of McMullins, as this guy who can take advantage of the system and then bring some stuff off script along with it to look good when he has to jump in at some point. I'd say weird class overall, because assuming Deebo Samuel is back for San Francisco, a speed receiver and a physical between the tackles running back aren't necessarily what I expected them to target with 2 of the first 3 picks. I love Drake Jackson, I had him as a top 50 overall prospect. I think with the rest of that defense around him, he could have a big rookie season as a pass rusher and become one of the better true speed guys off the corner in the league down the road. Offensive line pieces and a couple of talented corners on day 3 make sense, and then I actually really like Purdy as a long-term backup in the NFL with the moxie to step up when needed. Jackson, Burford, and Castro Fields could all turn out to be value picks for them, but Davis Price, Gray, and Womack were also all early for me, so that kind of evens things out here to some degree, and I'm not crazy about the entire haul, even though they certainly addressed areas that were somewhat question marks, but then also a couple of guys who I didn't quite get there. And the final team for today, the Seattle Seahawks, who didn't have the original first rounder, which would have been a 10th overall pick, still thanks to the Jamal Adams trade. However, they did acquire picks 9, 40, and 145 in this draft, along with Drew Lock, Noah Fant, Shelby Harris, a first and a second round pick next year in the Russell Wilson trade. And there's a lot to like in this class that they put together overall. First round 9th overall, Charles Cross, offensive tackle, Mississippi State. 2 back-to-back 4th rounders, 40th overall, Boye Mafe, edge defender, Minnesota. And 41st overall, Kenneth Walker III, running back, Michigan State. Then in the 3rd round, 72nd overall, Abraham Lucas, offensive tackle, Washington State. 4th round, 109th overall, Kobe Bryant, cornerback, Cincinnati. 2 5th rounders, Tariq Woolen, cornerback, UTSA. And Tyreek Smith, edge defender, Ohio State. And 2 more wide receivers in the 7th round, Bo Melton out of Rutgers, and Tariq Young out of Illinois Ryan. At the top of Cross, a first-team All-SEC left tackle as just a wretched sophomore, keeps defenders tight to his chest in the run game, does a good job of rolling his hips into contact and walling off defenders, truly graceful with his movement in pass protection, easily mirroring lateral movement, keeping his shoulders square and his back flat, plus he swallows power with those nearly 11-inch hands, and he has absurd ability to recover, overall holding opponents to only 2 sacks and 14 additional pressures on just over 700 total pass blocking snaps last season. He's just not the quickest off the ball, almost exclusively working zone concepts in the run game, and won't create a ton of movement at the point of attack. And the one issue that he has in pass protection at times is that he can be vulnerable to guys crashing through the inside shoulder after threatening upfield. Cross should instantly take over at left tackle for Dwayne Brown, and has the natural talent to become an elite pass protector, just like the guy in front of him was pretty soon. The Seahawks somewhat lucky here to get one of the big 3 offensive tackles, having one of those fall to them here, and they didn't potentially go for someone like non-Iowa's Trevor Penning, like some mock drafts would suggest, but certainly made the right pick here, I believe, since that spot would have been a huge issue for them otherwise. Then there's 2 back-to-back picks in the second, with Boy Mafe here, very impressive with his ability to flow laterally on the backside of zone runs, with his shoulders nearly parallel to the line of scrimmage, and then chase down the quarterback on bootlegs or a tight end sneaking into the flats across from him. Tremendous acceleration up the arc and a rapid inside arm to free himself off the blocker's reach. Very sudden with slipping inside and packs more force than you'd anticipate for that size, which is why he had 42 total pressures on just over 250 pass rush steps. Has to do a better job of establishing half-man relationships in the run and pass game. His eyes get trapped inside at times and he loses contain because of it. There's a lack of length at 32.5-inch arms, and when guys are able to get inside his frame, he usually struggles to disengage later on. The Hawks got a bunch of guys from recent drafts that are certainly liked, in Darrell Taylor, Alton Robinson, and even former first round a couple of years ago in Algie Collier, but Mafe has the traits to become the alpha for that group fairly soon, which they've needed for a while now. Then we get to Kenneth Walker, who had a breakout season after transferring over from Wake Forest, finishing well over 1,600 rushing yards and 18 touchdowns, yet still averaging 6.2 yards per carry for Sparty. Has excellent short area quickness, that ability to drop his hips and bounce outside, or force defenders to commit to the wrong side of blocks. Has a natural feel for navigating around defenders with curvilinear movement, reducing his area to grab, but then also pull through arm tackles. He was a big play machine last season, with 47 runs of 15 plus yards, which was tied for the most among all running backs in college football. Have a bad tendency of wanting to cut all the way across the formation or bounce out wide, kind of trusting his speed too much, and he's fairly improved in the pass game with just 19 career catches, and needing to do a better job of protecting the inside and pass pro. This was criticized by some people because Pete Carroll has allocated those types of resources to the running back position, and valued the rushing attack overall more so than the consensus, but with the status of Chris Carson really up in the air to even play at all anymore, and Rashad Penny being brought back on a 1-year prove-it deal after flashing late last season, this makes a lot more sense, especially as a perfect fit for offensive coordinator Shane Waldron, as this guy can stress the edges of the defense and then accelerate through cuts in the wide zone-based offense. Then Abraham Lucas presents a well-filled out frame at 6'6", 320 pounds, has the ability to reach block edge defenders on the front side and get ball carriers out to the edge. In general, he's smart with his angles and initial steps, displays super patient feet and protection, maintains that half-man relationship, and shows impressive lateral movement skills. This is why he didn't give up a sack along with only 9 total pressures and nearly 500 pass blocking snaps last season. Helped by those wide splits on the Wazoo offensive line, and the fact that he didn't have to take a ton of deep sets shows a bad tendency of lifting his inside foot and being vulnerable to guys who can stab at his shoulder pads, and he doesn't bring a lot of thump at first contact on more vertical run schemes. So just like Cross, Lucas interestingly comes from another area-based college offense, when the selection of Walker might indicate a heavier focus on the run game, but he does fit an outside zone-based offense, and is the best option to start at right tackle right away, I believe, for them. Day 3, where they started with Kobe Bryant, the cornerback out of Cincinnati, rather than the Lakers legend and a guy who shall rest in peace. 6'1", 190 pounds, was the more versatile corner in Cincinnati, lining up on the field side away from Matt Gardner, where he plays press, off, man, and zone. Shows excellent click and close from off alignment, stays true to his landmarks and zone coverage with good IQ, and plays the catch point well to not get boxed out by bigger bodies. Aims low as a tackler and only missed 3 of 44 attempts last season, while actually being the one winning the Shim Thorpe Award for the best defensive back in the country. not really dying to get involved in the action and run game when it's further away from it, and he got pushed around a bit by aggressive blockers. A lot of his success, I'd argue, was largely due to his ability to anticipate and read routes, but I believe as a pure athlete, he's mostly average, a fringe top 100 overall prospect for me, and one of the most complete all-around corners who can probably immediately replace DJ Reed while bringing better size to that spot. And then they go right back to the cornerback group, where they go with a freaky athlete into Rick Woolen at 6'4", 205 pounds with a crazy 79-inch wingspan and running a blazing 4.26 in the 40, has the quick twitch and length to sustain contact throughout routes. His wide receiver background shows up with the way that he can attack the ball in the air, and he has some force in those hands as well as he approaches blockers to set the edge in the run game and at times even sliding inside with his tight ends. Off the line and soft press, you see some false steps and exaggerated leans to where guys can get him spinning around with more advanced footwork, tends to overrun the breakpoint and has to show better awareness in zone to come off his initial assignment, and then as a tackler, kind of dives at the lack of ball carriers too much. As much as Seattle corner as it's gonna get, with what that regime was looking for during the glory days of the Seattle cover-free press bail days. Maybe not quite the same anymore in terms of the system that they're running there, but I thought Woolen had a chance to go top 50 just because of his kind of insane athleticism that he brings to the table. So this was certainly surprising to me. And then another guy who is very interesting here in terms of the athlete that he is, Tyreek Smith, a top 50 overall recruit back in 2018, has some shock in those hands and is quick to jump inside of blockers who overset him in the run game. Plus he covers a lot of ground with those long strides to chase down the football. Really threatens with speed around the edge and can bend like Gumby. He often adds some shake to his rushes and can kind of step around guys. Certainly has some room for improvement in terms of timing up or anticipating the snap. Lacks really any bulk throughout his frame and has to do a better job of targeting one half of the blocker. While he doesn't possess the power to really shorten the corner that way for himself as a rusher. Another guy who can be a major part of the rotation up front and give tackles problems with his ability to win inside and out, being able to just kind of cross them up. So he's a fun player to watch. Just like in the 7th round then with Bo Melton, a former 4-star recruit in 2017 who had several offers from bigger programs, has a very loose lower body and can make some dramatic steps outside his frame, kind of stopping on a dime as a route runner and making it tough for defenders to really read his hips. Tracks the ball well down the field and adjusts his body to it, as well as being jittery after the catch as defenders are trying to corral him. Routinely has to take a false or additional step with the back foot and tends to take away his own space towards the sideline, I would say. Just lacks some play strength to work through contact and not allow defenders to contest the catch points. Seattle needs guys to step up alongside DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. I still really like the 2nd round pick Dwayne Eskridge from a year ago, but other than that, they need guys to make plays for them, and I believe Melton can be that guy to provide a spark. And they went back to back with receivers, in part because they probably wouldn't be able to convince guys to come up to Pacific Northwest to catch passes from Drew Lock and Geno Smith. Derek Young presents a rocked up body, can work through contact with the ability to win at all 3 levels, and run through tackles, even though release package and route running overall are fairly raw at this point. But he did score 16 touchdowns on 73 career catches and has a lot of potential. As kind of stands out to me from the rest in terms of plus value being collected throughout all 3 days. After not making it a priority to spend high draft capital on protecting the quarterback Russell Wilson for such a long time, the first year he's gone, they get themselves 2 high upside offensive tackles who will bookend the offensive line for the next decade potentially. So that's pretty funny actually. They get somebody in Maffei who can become a true alpha of the edge, which they've been lacking for several years now. A super talented running back who will make the decision easier for them with Penny and Carson. A couple of corners who could both end up starting for them a year from now, potentially with more of a solid starter, and Kobe Bryant who can get up there right away, and then a high upside guy with Woolen. Tyreek Smith is a dude who has a lot of potential as a rotational rusher as well, and then they grab those 2 receivers at the end here, with Melton in particular going a couple of rounds later than where I would have had him valued. So very un-Seahawks-like in terms of actually drafting in positive correlation to the consensus board, rather than reaching on a couple of guys nobody was really talking about in the range in the early rounds. And that's actually why they are number 1 in my divisional draft rankings. Just quickly to tell you where I had those guys. They get 2 of my top 8 offensive tackles, a top 40 guy off the edge, my number 2 running back, 2 of my top 13 or so corners, my number 15 ranked edge, And then two more talent receivers who I think Melton was my number 18 at position, and Derek Young, I'm not totally sure about where his final grade was, but certainly liked a lot of the things that he showed. He does fresh time practices as well, just the size and the athleticism that he brings to the table. I really just thought they nailed a lot of their picks who are valued higher and put together one of the best classes overall. So really kudos to them for doing so at a time where they definitely needed to hit on the draft picks and really rebuild their roster. They had a lot of holes, and with Russell Wilson there, we're able to hide them to some degree. And now you are in kind of a situation where you're trying to find a future signal caller. I don't think either one of the guys that they have on the roster is that kind of guy right now, but maybe carrying that through that stretch as they're trying to rebuild that roster. And it's going to be interesting with Pete Carroll being the oldest head coach in the NFL. How long is he going to be there? Are they going to be able to build that second wave kind of guys, or maybe even third wave by now, since he's been there? But either way, great draft class to put together here, and that's kind of why I have them standing out at the top, while the other three I have tied for second. And if you wanted to put them in an order, maybe you can just take the one that's on the screen right now, but really thought it was very close between them. Let's start with Arizona here. Haven't really earned my trust throughout the years with the weird obsession with positionless defensive players. The Hollywood trade kind of got fleeced by Baltimore, I thought, and even if he puts up big numbers, might have to pay him more than he's actually worth. I did like a lot of the players that they actually selected, particularly those two day 3 offensive linemen, but not sure if they really put together a comprehensive plan here. Guys that I like and I could see succeed, but I want to see how it actually works out for them, and thought this was more so an average category, similar to San Francisco, who I talked about those 3 up and those 3 down prospects in terms of how I personally valued them compared to the draft position. Love Drake Jackson, Spencer Burford, and they took some swings late at talented guys, so I like that. But I thought running back and wide receiver in the third were somewhat questionable, with kind of narrow skill sets as well at the offer, so not totally necessary here. In the same realm, where there are some question marks that I have with what they did here, but certainly like some of the players as well that they got. And then finally with the Rams, who once again had limited resources with just 1 pick for the first 2 days, but I did like some of the guys that they got late. Once again, haven't really valued high draft capital, but one of the better teams at drafting guys on day 3 and developing them into contributors, even though they may not be star players. They weren't shy of grabbing guys that were some perceived as subpar athletes if they were good football players, and they certainly were. And I think one of the 7th rounders in Daniel Hardy has the potential to make a real impact for them on rushdowns eventually. So that's going to be one, if he pays off down the road, like I think he has the potential to, could be a major steal late. Investing into areas in the offensive line and the secondary where they were somewhat shallow, so I like that. Just blow me away with anything they did, but not a bad class by any means. And this wraps up our 7th video of the series already. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet, and share with a couple of friends who maybe are waiting desperately for us to get through the off season. I'm trying to kind of keep you entertained throughout it, and have a lot of things in the works, particularly on my page, but also some videos that I'm going to put out here. Of course, this means we only have one division left, the AFC West, and we'll get to that later this week. As always, you can find the link to my page, hellosfootballtalk.com, in the video description if you're interested in all my in-depth positional draft breakdowns and stuff like that, as well as all my social media outlets, which are on the screen right now as well. You want to learn more about every other team's class? Just go ahead and click the video at the top right corner. Feel free to binge listen to these or just find certain teams that you're interested in with the timestamp that I added. I will see you later this week. So until then, see you later. Peace!